Thank you. Esteemed members of this conference, dear comrades, it is an honor for me to have the opportunity to attend this conference and have a few words to our theme of our event from the perspective of a younger Austrian traditional socialist and anti-imperialist. I'm all the more pleased to be here in Sava Center in Belgrade because I've had for many years a strong connection to Serbia. I love Belgrade, and since 1999 I've been in the solidarity movement with Yugoslavia and Serbia and Austria. The de facto people's power of the new socialist victorious nations after the Second World War and lessons partially drawn from fascism brought the world after 1945 for several decades and balance of powers and rudimentary stability. Just the real existence of the socialist countries as a counterpower resulted in the capitalist countries of Western Europe, especially in Austria, to an unprecedented socio-economic reform policy that increased the participation of the working class people, nationalized the strategic sectors of the economy. The unions were raised in value, and in Austria, a new foreign policy was designed. Austria, which was again sovereign by the State Treaty of 1955 and the law on permanent neutrality, managed a policy between East and West in this way. We had good trade relations with the socialist countries who refused NATO membership, even though we were a protected part of the so-called capitalistic world. The de facto existence of the counterbloc put limits to the imperial claims of the Western elites. The establishment of a new world order has been the goal of the European Union and US-American elites since the end of this socialist counterbloc. At the threshold of the 21st century, there would be a world which should serve exclusively to the capitalist exploitation conditions and the profit motive of the Western centers and the division of the world. Philosophically, Francis Fukuyama described these policies in his book, The End of the History. Never again there should be an alternative to liberalism, free market economy, and Western dominance. In parallel, there was the socialist Yugoslavia, which did its own socialist path of development and as part of the leaders of the non-aligned movement. This alternative model of a sovereign way had to be removed from the perspective of the Western elites, mainly from Germany and later the US, to help keep up old territorial claims on geopolitically important Balkans. As in the case of Yugoslavia, the European Union elites acted in the incorporation of Eastern Europe as well in all later following military conflicts, such in the Middle East, partly independently and partly in close cooperation with US imperialism. The fall of Yugoslavia, however, was a historic fault line in the strategy and tactics of imperialism. Individual nations were incited against each other, and war was begun in state. Belgrade and the Serbian people had been demonized, secessionist forces supported financially, politically, and militarily. The country was placed under harsh economic sanctions and ultimately deprived of its economic foundations under an unprecedented NATO aggression. This was not only a war against Yugoslavia and Serbia, but a war against humanism and humanity. With the theft of Kosovo, an EU-NATO colony was created on the Serbian territory, which is geopolitically useful for the imperial powers. Kosovo is now an illegal mafia and apartheid state, which continues to enjoy the total support of the West. 3 years ago, I organized a solidarity trip to Kosovo, to visit Kosovska Mitrovica and the Serbian enclaves of Gračanica, Štrpce Gora, Goraštevac, Dečani, and Peć. I informed myself and I know what I'm talking about. The Federal Republic of Yugoslavia was the first country in Europe that resisted the neoliberal expansion after 1989, with much and a lot of bloodshed. We have to remember the sacrifice on the 15th year anniversary, and also have to remember the power of the Yugoslav army that heroically defended their homeland against the biggest military alliance in the world for 78 days. Similarly, a further recognition of Kosovo's independence violates international law, and membership of this artificial structure in international organizations must be prevented, like in UN or something else. Here, it is necessary to be in solidarity with the legitimate interests of Serbia for state integrity and sovereignty. Kosovo represents a precedent. Balkanization has now become a common word and aptly describes the strategy of imperialism as a whole. As recent examples, only Iraq, Libya, and Syria shall be cited here. It is about the destruction of countries, their splitting up and control. The European Union plays an essential role here with its foreign policy. The European Union is not a peace or social or welfare project. The European Union is a tough market-based competition regime in which the largest countries and economies push down the smaller ones. Just today, the European Union policy is primarily responsible for the socio-economic decline of Greece, Portugal, and Spain. The foreign policy of official Austria has played an inglorious role over the past 20 years, considering only the offensive recognition policy towards the independence of Slovenia, Croatia, and Kosovo. But now it has to be considered in the context of the common foreign and security policy of the European Union. The European Union is now an imperial player. It is nothing more than a political hinge for the interests of large financial institutions and Western European monopoly companies that in time cooperates less and one time cooperates more with US imperialism. In recent times, the global political constellation have changed again. The emerging economies are on the upswing. Russia and China are politically and economically back on the world stage. This is a step forward, this is a step towards multipolarity, as already shows the consistent occurrence of Russia and China in the case of Syria and Iran. China will overtake the US in economic development soon. Since the situation in Ukraine is still at stake, this is beyond this paper. In today's constellation, the concept of a serious, really serious, political and military neutrality would be the useful and a concept for the future, especially for smaller countries like Austria and also Serbia. A position that would make sense economically and politically, to have relationships on equal terms to our mutual advantage with essentially all states. For Austria, this would include the termination of various European Union treaties, because these treaties meaning being committed to neoliberalism and militarization. And for Serbia, a new policy would be a prerequisite to no longer represent European Union accession without an alternative. There are always alternatives in politics, and everywhere. Just have a look to Latin America, where a new kind of integration on sovereign basis just pushes the Latin American nations under the leadership of Cuba and Venezuela, and thereby teaches US imperialism lessons in this region of the world. This Latin American project, ALBA, would, of course, tailored to European conditions, be a future model for an aspired order in Europe. However, this is also a qualitative change in policy in favor of the mass of people, the working class people in the various countries of the European Union center. This has to be seen in a dialectical context and related to each other. An alliance of self-determined neutral countries that cooperate on equal terms and on full respect of international law would be mutually beneficial for each other politically and economically. This would be not only a new and sustainable peace architecture in Europe, but would change the balance of power again in favor of the normal, ordinary people, on the working class people. And I think we should struggle for a world in which the working people and the ordinary people have the say and not the elites. I'm in favor of a new socialism of the 21st century. And I think if we fight together, and I think these conferences are also steps in this direction, a world of peace and equality is not only necessary but possible. Thanks for attention.